Nearly every single CEO I talk to says the same thing, and I talk to a lot of them. I meet with over 500 CEOs a year. I've worked with more than 300 senior leaders at this point, and nearly every single one of them, at some point in our first conversation, says some version of the same three things. I don't like social media. I don't want the spotlight. I don't have an ego. And I believe them. I genuinely think that's true for most of these people. These are operators. These are builders. They got into this because they wanted to solve a problem and build something meaningful. They didn't get into it to become internet famous. They didn't start a company so they could post on LinkedIn 5 days a week. So when they tell me they don't want attention, I take them at their word. But here's what I also know. I know that their discomfort with being visible is quietly becoming the most expensive problem in their company. And I know that the story they're telling themselves about why they stay invisible, it's not quite the whole story. That's what I want to unpack today. Welcome to Cultivating Executive Presence, a podcast for leaders who must lead in public. I'm Justin Asiri, CEO of Executive Presence, and your guide to stepping into the visibility your company needs, even when it's the last thing you want to do. Every week, we'll explore the strategies, frameworks, and mindset shifts that help leaders build influence without losing integrity. From finding what to say to making peace with being seen, this is where reluctant leaders learn to lead out loud. So take a deep breath and let's get started. Let me paint a picture that I've seen hundreds of times. A CEO builds a company from nothing. They had an idea, they convinced a few early believers, they got some initial capital, and they ground it out. In the early days, the work spoke for itself. They closed the first 10 customers personally. They hired the first 20 employees through their own network. They raised their seed round because an investor met them, saw their conviction, and said yes. And in that stage, it worked. Being great at the work was enough. The company was small enough that the CEO's reputation was the company's reputation. You didn't need a brand strategy. You didn't need a media presence. You needed a good product and a founder who could close. So a belief forms, and it goes something like this. If I keep doing great work, the right people will find me. There's this deep-seated desire to be discovered, and I get it, because for a while, that's exactly what happened. Great work got them their first customers. Great work got them their first hires. Great work got them their first check. So they internalize a formula. Quality work equals recognition. I just need to keep being excellent, and the market will reward that. The problem is that formula has a shelf life. It works at 10 people. It mostly works at 30. By 50 people, it's cracking. By 100, it's broken. And by 200, it's not just broken, it's actively working against you. Because at a certain scale, the market doesn't discover you. You have to go find the market. And most CEOs I work with dramatically, and I mean dramatically, underestimate what it takes to build real market awareness and credibility at this stage. They think their product is their marketing. They think their customer results are their brand. And those things matter, don't get me wrong, but they're not sufficient, not anymore, not at this stage. I'll give you a quick example, and if you listen to the last episode, this pattern will sound familiar. I worked with a CEO, 15 years in the same industry, deeply technical. Customers loved him. He'd built the company to about 80 employees on the back of referrals and his personal network, and he was losing to a competitor who'd been in the market for 3 years. The competitor's product was arguably worse. But the competitor's CEO was everywhere. LinkedIn, podcasts, conferences, trade publications, and the market perceived that company as the leader. My client was still waiting to be discovered, still thinking, if I build it, they will come. I talked last episode about how that gap shows up in the real numbers: hiring, fundraising, pipeline. But today, I want to focus on something different. I want to talk about what's going on inside the CEO who stays invisible, because it's not a strategy problem. It's an identity problem. And the gear shift is this. At some point, you stop being just the operator and you start being the brand ambassador. You're not just building the product, you're telling the story. You're not just closing deals in private rooms, you're building credibility in public. You're not just leading internally, you're leading out loud. And most founders miss this gear shift. They keep their heads down, they keep grinding, they keep doing what worked in the early days, and they slowly fall behind someone who's objectively less qualified but dramatically more visible. So here's where I want to challenge something. A lot of these leaders frame their invisibility as humility. They say, I'm just not that kind of person. I'm humble. I'd rather let the work speak for itself. And on the surface, that sounds admirable. It sounds like integrity. It sounds like a leader who's got the right values. But what I want to draw a distinction that I think is really important. There's a difference between humility and hiding. Humility says it's not about me, and that's a beautiful value. I have enormous respect for leaders who carry that. The best leaders I've ever been around, including in the military, had genuine humility. They gave credit to their team. They didn't need to be the star. They cared about the mission. Hiding says something different. Hiding says, I'm uncomfortable, so I'm going to call it humility and move on. And that's not a value. That's avoidance dressed up as virtue. Most CEOs I work with haven't actually interrogated which one they're doing. They just know it doesn't feel right to put themselves out there. It feels self-promotional. It feels like ego. And because they don't want to be that person, because they have genuine integrity, they opt out entirely. But opting out entirely isn't humility, it's a different kind of self-protection. I use this analogy a lot, and I introduced it last episode, so I'll be brief. I spent 5 years on nuclear submarines, and one of the things I learned is that are three distinct leadership roles: the junior officer who does the work, the department head who leads through others, and the commanding officer, the captain, who sets the course, builds the culture, and represents the ship. The captain creates what we call the felt presence. Here's the failure pattern I saw over and over again. Officers who were exceptional junior officers, the best technicians on the boat, struggled when they got promoted. Why? Because they kept operating like junior officers. They stayed in the engine room, they kept turning wrenches because that's where they were comfortable. That's what earned them respect in the past. But the job had changed and they hadn't changed with it. I see the exact same pattern with CEOs. A CEO at 50 employees who's still operating like the CEO at 10 employees, who's still trying to personally close every deal, personally recruit every key hire, personally manage every client relationship. That CEO is the commanding officer who can't get out of the engine room. And the CEO who refuses to be visible publicly, same thing. They're avoiding the bridge. They're avoiding the part of the job that feels uncomfortable and unfamiliar because the engine room is where they feel safe. But the ship needs a captain on the bridge, and your company needs a CEO who's willing to be seen. So what do I actually say when a CEO tells me they don't want to do this? I say, I hear you, and I'm not asking you to love it. I'm asking you to tolerate the discomfort in service of your organization. In service of. That phrase matters to me because this isn't about you becoming an influencer. It's not about you building a personal brand so you can go speak at conferences and feel good about yourself. It's about recognizing that your organization, the people who work for you, the investors who believed in you, the customers who depend on you, they all benefit when you're visible, and they all pay a price when you're not. And here's the thing I always come back to. You have a long, proven history of doing uncomfortable things because your organization needed it. Think about the first time you pitched an investor. You had nothing, maybe a slide deck and a prototype. You stood in front of someone with money and said, bet on me. Was that comfortable? Probably not. But you did it because the company needed capital to survive. Think about your first executive hire. You probably couldn't afford them. You had to sell them on the vision when there was no revenue, no traction, maybe no product. That was uncomfortable, but you did it because the company needed that talent. Think about the hard conversations you've had, the co-founder breakup, the layoff, the board meeting where the numbers were bad and you had to own it, the customer you lost and had to call personally. None of that was comfortable. You did all of it because the organization needed you to. Being visible is the same thing. It's just a different flavor of uncomfortable. I had a client, a CEO of a Series B software company, about 150 employees, great operator. He'd built the company from scratch, very product focused, deeply respected by his team. And when we first started working together, he told me straight up, I hate this stuff. I hate social media. I hate the idea of posting about myself. It makes my skin crawl. I said, great. I'm not asking you to love it. I'm asking you to do it anyway. And then I asked him a question. I said, when you had to lay off 12 people last year, did you love that? When you had to tell your board that you missed the quarter, did you enjoy that call? When you had to part ways with your co-founder, was that comfortable? Obviously not. But he did all of those things because the organization needed him to. And now, 6 months into showing up publicly, his company's inbound recruiting has changed. His pipeline looks different. His investors are happier. And here's the thing he didn't expect. He actually finds parts of it fulfilling. Not all of it. He still doesn't love the mechanics, but he loves the impact. And actually, I'd argue it's less uncomfortable than most of what you've already done. Nobody is going to fire you for posting on LinkedIn. Nobody's going to pull your funding because you gave a podcast interview. The downside risk is basically zero. I call LinkedIn bumper bowling. The gutters are blocked. You'd have to try really hard to actually hurt yourself there. But the resistance is real because it's identity level. The other hard things, pitching, hiring, firing, those felt like part of the CEO job. This doesn't. This feels like something else. This feels like self-promotion. And for a lot of people, self-promotion triggers something deep. It feels wrong. It feels vain. It feels like the opposite of who they want to be. So I want to be very clear about the reframe. This is not self-promotion. This is organizational leadership. Your being visible isn't about you. It's about the 200 people who work for you, who are trying to recruit their friends, and nobody knows who you are. It's about your sales team trying to close enterprise deals against a competitor whose CEO has 50,000 LinkedIn followers and is speaking at every industry conference. It's about your investors who are trying to get you into rooms and realizing that when they mention your name, nobody knows it. When you frame it that way, when you stop thinking about it as, I have to promote myself, and start thinking about it as, my team needs me to be visible, everything shifts. The discomfort doesn't go away, but the motivation changes. And the motivation is what gets you through the discomfort. I covered the real costs of CEO invisibility in detail last episode. The hiring tax, the weaker pipeline, the harder fundraisers. I'm not going to repeat all of that. If you haven't listened to episode 2, go back and hear that case because the numbers are real. But there's one dimension I didn't cover there that I want to dig into now, and that's the investor perspective, because this has shifted dramatically. Even in the last 2 or 3 years, investors have started saying this publicly, openly on record. They want to see founder-led marketing. They want to see founders who have an audience, who can generate attention, who can move a market with their voice. And this isn't some niche VC opinion. This is becoming mainstream investment thesis, because a founder with an audience is a founder who can attract customers without spending millions on paid acquisition. A founder with an audience is a founder who can attract talent without paying 25% to a recruiter for every senior hire. A founder with an audience is a founder who already has distribution for whatever they build next. Think about what that means for an investor's perspective. They're evaluating risk. They're trying to figure out which company is going to make it and which isn't. And one of the biggest risks in a growth stage company is, can this team generate enough market awareness to hit their growth targets? If the CEO has zero public presence, that's a risk factor. If the CEO has a strong following, a recognized voice, a reputation in the market, that's an asset that de-risks the whole investment. So when two companies show up with similar metrics and one has a visible founder and the other doesn't, the visible founder gets the better term sheet every time. And it's becoming more obvious every year. Beyond fundraising, all of these costs compound, and they compound in the other direction too. Every month you stay invisible, the gap between you and your visible competitor widens because they're compounding, building an audience, building trust, building a reputation week after week, and you're standing still. And here's the part that makes it a leadership problem, not a marketing problem. None of these people can fix this for you. Your marketing team can't post as you. Your recruiter can't build your reputation. Your head of sales can't lend you their credibility. The CEO's visibility is a CEO problem. Only you can do this, and when you choose not to, Everyone else has to work harder to compensate. I want to talk about why this is so hard at a deeper level, because it's not a time problem, it's not a knowledge problem, it's an identity problem. The skills that made you successful as a founder, the heads down execution, the obsessive product focus, the let the work speak for itself mentality, those skills are now the exact thing holding you back. And I'm not saying they were wrong. They were exactly right for that stage, but the stage has changed. At a certain point, your job is no longer to build the product. Your job is to build the narrative. Your job is to make sure the market understands who you are, what you stand for, and why it matters. That's not vanity, that's leadership at scale. But here's what makes it hard. You've spent 5, 10, 15 years building an identity as the person who does the work, the hands-on leader, the one who knows every customer by name, the one who's in the weeds. And now someone's telling you to step out of the weeds and go stand on a stage, literal or figurative, and talk about what you're doing. That feels like becoming someone you're not. And for people with genuine integrity, that's deeply uncomfortable because they don't want to be performers. They don't want to be self-promoters. They don't want to be the CEO who's out there building a personal brand while the company falls apart. And I respect that resistance. I think it comes from a good place. But I also think it's based on a false choice. The choice isn't between heads down operator and narcissistic influencer. There's a massive middle ground. And that middle ground is what I call leading out loud, being a visible leader who shares their perspective, builds credibility, and creates that felt presence I talked about earlier. That sense that even when you're not in the room, people know what you stand for. You don't have to love it. You don't have to be a natural at it. You just have to decide that this is part of the job now and then start. There's another dimension to this that I want to touch on because it's not just about external visibility. It's about the amplification problem that every growing company faces. When your company is 15 people, you walk into a room and everyone knows what matters. They've heard you talk about the vision. They've been in the meetings. They know the priorities because you told them personally, probably over lunch or standing by the coffee machine. At 50 people, that doesn't work anymore. You physically can't be in enough rooms. At 100, it's impossible. Half the company has probably never had a real conversation with you. At 200 people, you're not even a rumor to some of your employees. They've seen your name on the org chart. Maybe they saw you at an all hands, but they don't know how you think. They don't know what keeps you up at night. They don't know why this company exists beyond the talking points on the website. And here's the thing. The fix is not working harder. You cannot outwork the amplification problem. You can't personally have coffee with 200 people every quarter. You can't be in every Slack channel. You can't attend every team meeting. The fix is building amplification channels, ways to multiply your voice, your values, and your vision across a company that's growing faster than your calendar can keep up with. And guess what the most effective amplification channel is? It's your public presence. When you post on LinkedIn, your employees see it. When you go on a podcast, your team listens. When you write about what you believe and why the company exists and where you're headed, that's not just marketing. That's internal communication at scale. You're telling your own people, this is what I stand for. This is where we're going. This is why it matters. I've had clients tell me that their LinkedIn posts did more for internal culture than their last 3 all-hands meetings because people saw their CEO being real, being specific, being out there representing the company with conviction. And that lit people up in a way that a slide deck never could. So if you think this is just about external perception, you're missing half the value. Your public presence is your internal megaphone. And at a certain scale, you need that megaphone. Not because you're loud, because the building is getting bigger and the people in the back can't hear you anymore. I want to close with something I find a little bit funny. And I say funny because I think when you hear it, you're going to realize the logic here is kind of undeniable. If you make it to the big time, if your company actually goes public one day, being visible is not optional. It's literally your job. As a public company CEO, you will have a corporate communications team. You will have a PR firm. You will do earnings calls every quarter where analysts are hanging on your every word and parsing your tone of voice for clues about guidance. You will do media interviews. You will sit on panels. You will be on CNBC or Bloomberg or whatever the relevant outlet is for your industry. You'll have analysts writing about you by name, journalists calling you, shareholders who want to hear from you directly. I've worked with 5 public company CEOs, and I can tell you that every single one of them wished they had started this earlier. The ones who built this muscle before they went public, who'd been showing up, finding their voice, getting comfortable with public communication, they transitioned into that role naturally. The ones who hadn't, it was like being thrown into the deep end. They were learning to swim in front of an audience of millions with real money on the line. At that stage, there is no, I'm not really a public-facing person. That's the gig. If you don't want to do it, don't take the company public. But if you do, this becomes the single most important part of your role as CEO. So here's my question. If you're going to have to do this anyway, if the end game requires you to be visible, public-facing leader, why wouldn't you start building that muscle now? Why wouldn't you get those reps in while the stakes are low, while the audience is small, while a bad post just means nobody sees it, instead of it moving your stock price? Right now, you're in the minor leagues of public leadership, and I mean that in the best way. This is where you learn. This is where you develop the skill. This is where you figure out your voice, your rhythm, what works and what doesn't. This is where you get comfortable being uncomfortable. And in the meantime, while you're building that muscle, it's going to pay off at every stage along the way. At your next fundraise, investors are going to see a CEO who knows how to tell the company story. That matters when you're sitting across the table from a partner at Sequoia or Andreessen. In your next recruiting push, top candidates are going to find a CEO with a point of view, with a reputation, with a public track record of leadership. That matters when you're competing for talent against a company that's offering 20% more in equity. In your next sales cycle, potential customers are going to see a CEO who's present, credible, and known. That matters when you're trying to close an enterprise deal and the decision maker is Googling you. You're not just preparing for some hypothetical future IPO. You're compounding advantage right now. Every post, every podcast, every public conversation is a deposit in a reputation account that pays compound interest. And the earlier you start depositing, the bigger the account when you need it most. Now, I want to be honest about something because I've spent most of this episode making the case for why you should be visible. And I believe everything I've said, but I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't acknowledge what it actually feels like to put yourself out there. Because it takes real courage, and I don't think people talk about that enough. It takes courage to prepare a keynote speech, to spend hours on it, researching, rehearsing, refining your message, and then walk out on stage and see 15 people in the audience. 15 in a room built for 200. And you still have to deliver it like it matters, because it does. But in that moment, it doesn't feel like it does. It feels like a waste. It takes courage to spend an hour crafting a LinkedIn post, to really think about what you want to say, to get the words right, to put something out there that you genuinely believe in, and then watch it get 4 likes. 4, one of which is your marketing director being supportive. That sucks. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That genuinely sucks. It takes courage to share an idea you think is important and have it met with crickets. No comments, no shares, no engagement, just silence. You put yourself out there and the world shrugged. And it takes courage to share something and have it not just ignored, but misinterpreted or challenged or picked apart by someone in the comments who doesn't know your context, doesn't know your experience, but has a strong opinion about why you're wrong. That's a specific kind of uncomfortable that most CEOs aren't used to. In a boardroom, people treat you with a certain deference. On the internet, they don't. I've seen leaders pour significant time and energy into articulating something they care deeply about, and it just doesn't land. Nobody notices, or the wrong people notice, or it sparks a debate they didn't intend, and suddenly they're defending themselves against strangers. And the natural reaction is to pull back, to say, see, this isn't for me. I tried it and it didn't work. But here's what I want you to understand. All of that, the crickets, the low engagement, the misinterpretation, the random person taking a swipe at you in the comments, that's not failure, that's training. You're thickening your skin. You're getting okay with putting something out there and not getting a thunderous applause. You're learning to separate your self-worth from your engagement metrics. You're learning that a post with 4 likes might be the one that your next investor reads and remembered. You're learning that the keynote with 15 people in the audience might include the one person who becomes your biggest client. And most importantly, you're finding your voice. That's the part you cannot skip. You cannot find your voice in private. You cannot workshop it in a vacuum. You can't perfect your message in a Google Doc and then debut it fully formed to the world. It doesn't work that way. Finding your voice requires the reps. It requires posting the thing that doesn't land. It requires giving the talk that falls flat. It requires putting out the idea that gets misunderstood, because each one of those moments teaches you something. It teaches you what reaches and resonates and what doesn't. It teaches you how to say what you mean more clearly. It teaches you what you actually believe versus what you think you're supposed to believe. And over time, not overnight, but over time, you develop a voice that's genuinely yours, not a performance, not a persona, your actual perspective, refined by the process of sharing it publicly and seeing how it lands. That's why starting earlier matters, not just because of the compound interest of reputation building, but because the voice you'll have in 2 years is shaped by the reps you started taking today. The sooner you start, the sooner you find it. And once you find it, everything gets easier. The posting gets easier, the speaking gets easier. The discomfort doesn't go away, but it stops being the thing that defines the experience. So yes, it takes courage, real courage, and I have a lot of respect for leaders who are willing to step into that discomfort even when the early returns are discouraging, because they're playing the long game. And the long game always wins. So let me bring this full circle. I started by saying that nearly every CEO I talk to tells me they don't like social media, they don't want the spotlight, and they don't have any ego. And I believe them. But what I also believe is this: your invisibility is not a personality trait. It's a decision. And it's a decision you've been making by default, not by design. You've been telling yourself a story. I'm humble. I'm heads down. I let the work speak for itself. And that story has been protecting you from the discomfort of being visible, but it hasn't been protecting your organization. Your team needs you on the bridge, not in the engine room. Your company needs a CEO who's willing to be seen, heard, and known. Not because it's fun, not because it's easy, but because at this stage of the game, it's part of the job. And you've never been someone who shied away from the job because it was hard. You pitched investors when you had nothing. You made hard calls when nobody else would. You built something from zero when the odds were against you. This, showing up, being visible, leading out loud, this is easier than all of that. It just feels different. And different isn't the same as harder. So here's what I want to leave you with. Humility is a virtue. I'm not challenging that. The world needs more humble leaders, and if you carry that value, please don't lose it. But invisibility is a choice, and it's a choice that comes with a cost your team pays, a cost your investors pay, a cost your customers pay, and a cost you pay, and slower growth, weaker hiring, harder fundraisers, and a widening gap between you and the competitor who figured this out before you did. You don't have to become someone you're not. You don't have to dance on TikTok. You don't have to post every day. You don't have to love it. You just have to start. And I want to be honest with you about what start looks like, because I think people imagine this massive transformation. It's not. Starting might mean writing one LinkedIn post this week about something you actually believe. It might mean saying yes to the next podcast invitation instead of reflexively declining. It might mean telling your marketing team, I'm ready to be more involved in how we show up publicly. That's it. That's the starting line. You don't need a content strategy. You don't need a PR firm. You don't need a personal brand playbook. You need a decision. The decision that says, I'm going to tolerate this discomfort because my organization needs me to. And then you take one step, because your team is waiting for you to choose differently. And the sooner you start, the more it pays off. That's episode 3 of Cultivating Executive Presence. If this resonated, if you heard yourself in any of what I described today, I'd genuinely love to hear from you. Send me a message on LinkedIn. Tell me where you are in this journey. I respond to every message. And if you know a CEO or senior leader who needs to hear this episode, send it to them. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do for someone is give them the language for something they've been feeling but haven't been able to articulate. Next episode, we're shifting from why this matters to how to think about it. We're going to dig into the expertise audience intersection, what you should actually talk about when you decide to show up, because I don't know what to say is the next wall, and I'm going to help you knock it down. I'm Justin Asiri. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.